Okay, I think we're good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Ideas on Fire webinar. My name is Kathy Hannebeck. I'm the president of Ideas on Fire, which is an academic consulting and editing agency that helps progressive interdisciplinary academics create awesome work in the world. And as I said, this is part of our webinar, our free webinar series on topics ranging from mapping out what you want to do over the semester to working with advisors for those of you who are graduate students, to mentoring advisees for those of you who are faculty, to writing, to work-life balance, and to kind of all of the things that come up as an interdisciplinary progressive academic. So today I'm really excited to have Dr. Kate Drabinski lead the webinar today. Kate is one of our fantastic Rockstar coaches in our grad school Rockstar program and dissertation Rockstar bootcamp. Some of you who have registered, and I see in the chat room, I know have been through these programs and are familiar with Kate's work. Kate is a senior lecturer in gender and women's studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she also directs Women Involved in Learning and Leadership, which is a student activist group on campus. Kate is additionally a freelance writer with a regular column called Field Tripping in Baltimore City paper. She works with several local artists on the Queer Stories projects and its lesbian popcorn cart, which serves up popcorn with a side of local LGBTQ history at events and outsider art shows in the region. She's a member of Baltimore's LGBTQ History Committee and works with local activists to lead history walking and bicycling tours in the city. And if you know anything about Kate, you know how much she loves biking. And in her spare time, she rides her bike all around and writes about what she sees in her long-running blog, What I Saw Riding My Bike Around Today. She earned her PhD in rhetoric from UC Berkeley with a graduate certificate in gender, women, and sexuality. And she is, as I said, a coach in our graduate school Rockstar program and dissertation Rockstar bootcamp. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to her and we can learn about work-life balance in the context of power.
Thank you so much, Kathy. All right, I'm going to pull up my very first PowerPoint. So I'm excited all of you are here today. All right, so let me just get this set. All right, so is that working, Kathy?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. Okay, so when we first conceived of this webinar on work-life balance, we thought about it as a way or a conversation that we could have about how to figure out what to say yes and no to in the context of power and balanced relationships at work. So for example, I am a contingent faculty member. I have, oh, hold on a second. Okay, sorry. So I'm a contingent faculty member. I'm a lecturer, so it's not a tenure track position. And I've also been a postdoctoral teaching fellow. I've been an adjunct. I've been in a lot of positions where I have looked like a faculty member, but I haven't been a faculty member. And people have treated me like a faculty member sometimes when they had something they wanted me to do. So the idea was that we would talk today about how to figure out balancing work and life in that context of those kinds of power relations. But now in the last month or so, I think a lot of us have found, at least I have, that we've added something about that context of power, which is how to find balance in the context of work, life, and this kind of erupting social movement. A lot of us are activists and have been, and organizers and have been for a long time. But even we've been active, there's something happening now surging of our attention. So I'm hoping well. So moving forward, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what we mean by work-life balance, which I think is especially tricky for academics. And then I'll go through some tips of ways to set up a kind of rubric for yourself in deciding how to say yes or no. And then we'll talk through some examples. And in this conversation, hopefully discuss how to balance these multiple demands on our time and energy. All right, so first, the big questions I want to talk about are first, what do we mean by work-life balance? I was sort of first introduced to this concept through talk in a corporate structure, right, that assumes a 9-to-5 job And when you get home, maybe you have trouble because you take so much work home with you or something like that. For academics and grad students, dissertators, people at all levels of the academy, I think the question is a little bit different. For a lot of us, there's a sense that it's a false dichotomy, right? That our, and so I want to talk about that a bit. Next, how do we know if we're in or out of balance? What's the difference between I feel busy and something's actually wrong here? And then finally, the sort of next bit is about figuring out our values and our priorities. And it's a way of deciding how to say yes or no to things. And then finally, we'll go through some examples of how to figure out whether or not to say yes or no. What do we add to the plates we're already balancing? All right, so let's start with work-life balance. I think for a lot of us in the academy, there's a sense that our work and our life are coterminous. We understand that a lot of the work that we do, we would do anyway. The reading that we do, we would read whether we were being paid for it or not, and likely if we're in grad school, we're not being paid or we're being paid very little, right? So our conceptions of work are sometimes a little bit different. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I've always really believed with Karl Marx that work is what makes us human. The problem isn't labor, the problem is alienated labor. Now we can have a different webinar or a conversation arguing about whether or not academic work is alienated labor or not. But I do think it's true that in a lot of ways, it's some of the least alienated labor there is. And all I mean by that is we have control over our time in ways that people in other professions don't have, right? And there's also a sense that the work that we do is part of making our own life, right? That it's a kind of false dichotomy. What I want to encourage us to do, though, is to remember that your work is not your life. There's a sense sometimes that it is, but it isn't, right? A lot of our labor in the academy is work, right? It's paid labor, right? And it's especially true of teaching labor, right? And I want us to think about how thinking of that as work, as just paid labor, like any other kind of paid labor, can help us keep it more in balance. I find that grad students, dissertation writers, new professors, contingent faculty members, the thing that we spend the most time on is often teaching, because it feels good. We get an immediate rush from it. We get feedback from students. It's often for a lot of us why we do this in the first place. It's the part of our work that feels the best most immediately, and it is also the easiest place to overwork, right? So when we're talking about work-life balance, I want to recognize the ways that our work and life are coterminous for a lot of us, but at the same time are not. Right? And making a distinction can be really helpful to make sure that you don't get those plates out of balance, right? That you've got room for all the other things you want to do. But what about politics? Is politics work, right? So is our activism also a kind of labor? And I would argue in a Marxist sense, it absolutely is, right? It's a way of putting yourself into the world, mixing it up and doing something with it. So when we're thinking about work-life balance, I also think that politics has to be in that conversation. Which rallies do we go to? How many phone calls do we make? At what point is there a point in the day where we can stop, quote, doing politics, especially for those of us who understand that life is political, that we are political all the time. But in this conversation of work-life balance, I think we have to start having right now conversations about how that balance works. And then finally, I want to talk just for a second about power. Now, I'm a good Foucauldian, like I'm sure a lot of you are, and I understand that power isn't something that someone has and wields over you, or that someone else has, or that you want, right? It's not a property. It's a set of strategic relations. But the way I think is useful to think about in terms of work-life balance is that power produces possibilities for us at the same time as it constrains our choices, right? And it also, we have to choose. We have to say yes. We have to say no. We have to have a response. So and there will be multiple sort of pulls on our time and energy, and it is up to us to sort of figure out, given the constraints and limits of possibility, what we can do and what will help us live the kind of life we want to live. Okay, I want to talk also a little bit now about how do you know if you're in or out of balance? I would say this is one of those things that you just know. But I want to draw just draw our attention to a few things that are really big clues. For me, the biggest clue when I'm out of balance is sleep. Either I can't get to sleep, I can't fall asleep, I can't stay asleep, or I am exhausted even after a lot of sleep. Another is anxiety. I'm an anxious person by nature. I just am an anxious bird. But when I notice myself becoming incredibly anxious about a very small thing that rationally I know I have no control over or is not important, like, am I getting the water bill today? Where is it lost in the mail? Something like that. I know it's a sign that I'm out of balance, right? That my mind is spinning somewhere, right? Because I haven't given it the space and time to be bored and to be itself. Another sign is definitely physical pain, aches, lower back pain. A lot of body pain is trying to tell you something about being out of balance. For me, it often is a sign that I haven't given myself time to be physically active like I want to be. But pay attention to those pains. Sometimes those pains are trying to tell you something. Other things like being quick to anger, changes in eating patterns, overwhelming sadness, those are all sort of telltale signs that something's out of balance. Environmental changes. What I mean by this is if you are used to having your physical space organized and it's disorganized, that can often be an outward manifestation of the imbalance that's going on in your life. Right? So taking just a little bit of time to organize things on the outside can help one find a sense of balance. For some of us, we use ordering the outside to conceal the part where inside we're out of balance, right? So you know sort of where you are on that level, what your sort of outside environment is telling you about yourself. And then the last two I wanted to mention are further up on this list, disinterest and then also busyness. And I think these are really big signs of being out of balance. For academics, for creatives, for activists, the thing that keeps us going is our sense of curiosity, right? It's why we got here. I remember when I started graduate school, I went to grad school because I wanted to learn. I had things I wanted to discover, and I was really passionate and excited about that. When I noticed myself not being curious, not asking questions, not really caring about stuff, that's a sign for me that something's really out of balance, because that's, for a lot of academics, at the core of who we are and our own sort of sense of ourself. And then the last thing I want to mention is busyness. Busyness is, sometimes we're really busy. Right? Like, I'm really busy right now. It's the first week of school. I have to finish up grades for my winter class. I have a newspaper column due this week. I have a lot of tasks to do, but there's a difference between having a full schedule and that sense of overwhelming busyness, where if you have even a moment free, you start to panic that you're not doing something. And that is, again, a sign that you're out of balance. And you need to figure out how to work in some time to let yourself be bored. Because to go back to that sense of curiosity, I really think that having time and space to do nothing is part of how we stay in balance, especially as academics and creatives. But overall, I think that you know when you're out of balance, but you do have to be honest with yourself and check in. And it's really, really helpful to actually write down some ways to tell and sort of senses of your own priorities. So that's what we'll talk about next. So there are two sort of main places where I think we need to pause and do some actual writing down of our values and our priorities. Right? These are two sort of things that we need to do when we're thinking about how to keep ourselves in balance. And values are the big picture thing. And I think we've done ourselves great harm by letting the right take control of values talk. Right? We all have things that are important to us, that mean things to us. And there's like the big picture values. What's the world that I want? What do I imagine is the kind of world I want to live in? And then what's our place in that world? What is my role in that world? I think right now, for me, the overwhelming call to activism at every moment, and we have to resist is sometimes really overwhelming, because I can't resist all the things all the time, right? So what do I do? Part of figuring out how to stay in balance in terms of our politics is also thinking about what our values are. What's the place for me in this world that I can make the effect that I want to make, right? None of us have to do all the things, but we all have to do some thing. And then finally, in thinking about our own sort of trajectory in this set of values, is thinking about where am I now and where do I want to be in the future. Right? So this will help us figure out in a big picture way what our priorities are going to be. Right? So let me give you a quick example to talk through what I mean by this. Right? So I remember being at the stage of writing my dissertation in graduate school. And I went to graduate school for the reasons a lot of people, I think, go to grad school. I was 22 years old. I'd always been good at school. I read an article that I really liked by Judith Butler, and I was like, I want to read more of that. And my advisor in undergrad told me I could read more of that if I went to grad school. So I went to grad school. And I didn't know exactly why I was making that decision, right? And then once I started teaching, and I really enjoyed teaching. That was really fun for me. I struggled a bit with some of the research and writing parts. Once I got to the dissertation level and the only motivator in that writing was me, I realized I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. And I think this is a really common experience for people at the dissertation level or at the comps level, like right before you're about to hit a big milestone. And it was hard. I realized that I hadn't done the thinking to even know whether or not I was actively choosing my life at that moment, or if I was just going along. So when you reach these kinds of moments, I think it's really important to figure out, like, well, do I want to choose this, right? So for me, the world I want has critical thinkers in it who know the world as it is. It's not the world as it has to be, right? It's full of people who are actively engaged in generous ways with mutually helping each other, recognizing our interdependence, and trying to build the world that we want. Okay, so that's the world I want. And what's my place in the world? I realized when I was dissertating that what I wanted to do was be a teacher, that I have skills in that area. Students respond well to me. I enjoy conversations with students, that my training in feminist pedagogy had taught me a lot about what was valuable in terms of hearing different kinds of voices. And my place in that world that I wanted was as a teacher and facilitator. And then I thought, okay, where am I now? I'm at the dissertation phase. I'm frustrated. I don't want to write this. Okay, so what can I do, right? Where am I now? Now I'm at this spot. I could choose to stop writing the dissertation and get a job teaching high school. I could finish the dissertation and treat it like a teaching certificate and try to get a job, right? Or I could leave academia and do the kinds of teaching and facilitating elsewhere in some other part of the world, right? There are a lot of ways to do that. I ultimately decided to finish the dissertation as a teaching certificate and have been fortunate enough to be able to cobble together a living teaching. But I think I remember feeling at those moments that I was actively choosing it instead of just doing it because I had to do it, right? So this long story is basically just to say that when we define our values and we think about what we really want in the world, right, rather than what is right in front of us and we think we have to do, right? All that stuff we teach our students about building the world we want, not the world we have been given, right? When we make those active decisions, I think it helps us make decisions on a daily basis as well. So that's sort of the next set of steps. So the next question is how you define your priorities. And your priorities are, because there are a million ways to get to that world that you want, right? And to get to that place you want to be. But what are the different priorities for different parts of your life? And this is another thing that I think is really important to actually write down. So make a list. I make a list every week of different sets of priorities for my teaching life, my student group, my politics, my political activism for the week, my writing, and then also a list of priorities, that are outside of school and politics, though of course everything is political, but time with my partner, nurturing friendships, and increasingly figuring out how to aid in the mutual aid society I've surrounded myself with. Right? These are all sort of different sets of priorities. Or if you're thinking about balancing, right, if you're a server, all the plates on that thing that you're balancing on your way out to the table. So actually list those priorities so you have a sense of what they are. And then figure out what are short-term priorities and what are your long-term priorities. On a daily basis, I have a to-do list of things I have to get done. Today, I have to give this webinar, right? But that's not a long-term priority, right? So long-term priorities are things like finishing your dissertation, right? passing your comps, getting figuring out how you're going to pay your bills a semester from now, right? If you're sort of in a contingent faculty world, those are sort of slightly longer term priorities, and those need to always be in the background governing the decisions you make in terms of keeping yourself in and out of balance. Because a lot of times you'll be offered opportunities that feel like you really want to say yes, and it's really important to think about what your long-term priorities are before you do that, right? And we'll talk about some examples of that in a minute. And then finally, I want to encourage you to think about who you prioritize with and for. As academics, we're often treated by the academy as monads, right? No one sees us teach. We all do that alone. We write dissertations alone. We go on the job market. We have to pretend we'll always be alone, and if we come with a partner, we have to pretend they're not there. If we have to pretend that we're never going to have children because then they won't want to give us a job, those kinds of things. There's something really alienating in the academy about being with other people, but we are with other people. We have friends, we have relationships that matter to us, and I think it's really important to remember that when we're making these priorities, other people are involved, and even if they're not immediately involved in the decision, they can be a really good sounding board when we're trying to decide whether or not to do something. I have a friend from graduate school named Sarah Burgess, who I've talked with. I've talked to Sarah almost every day for almost 20 years, and she's really a helpful sounding board deciding whether or not I want to do something or if I'm doing it because I think I should, and I think is really important. So let's talk about when you should say no. A lot of your advisors and mentors will tell you to always say no, to just say no. Say no until the dissertation is done. Say no until you got the job. Say no until you have tenure. Lots and lots of encouragement to say no. Now there's a lot, and when you're in the moment, there's a lot of pressure to say yes, right? So it's really important before you say yes or no to anything to take these 3 steps, right? To check with your values. Is this something that helps build the world I want and helps make the space for myself in it? Does it fit within my current priorities, right? So if you have a dissertation chapter due in March, almost everything is going to keep you away from that priority, right? So no saying is probably what you're going to end up doing more of. But check with your priorities and see if there's room. And then finally check with your team. And by team, I just mean the people who you work with, your friends, your comrades, your colleagues, your partners, the people who know you and who are maybe outside of that immediate academic relationship or work relationship. So saying no is really, really hard to do. And the easiest thing to do is to just say no to everything. And I think that's why a lot of mentors suggest that. Unless it's something that serves them, they'll just tell you to say no. But I think it's also really important to sometimes say yes. And the reason I say this is because when we have a priority that's dominant, right, like finishing the dissertation or finishing the job application, there's a tendency to think anything that isn't directly towards that priority is a distraction, and we should say no to it. But that leaves us with a work life way out of balance, right? Because life is much more than just that single priority. So saying yes sometimes makes a whole lot of sense because it feeds our soul and it feeds our creativity and it feeds us in ways that are really, really important and that we will miss and lose if we just say no. So I'm not saying say yes to all the things, but I'm saying check your values, check your priorities, check with your team. Do you have room on your plate to say yes to these things? But before you say yes or no, it's really important to always take time. Take at least 24 hours before you say yes or no. Have your lines ready. I'm really interested in that. That sounds like a great opportunity. I just need to check with my calendar at home, right? Or something like that. Just have some lines ready so that you give yourself a buffer, right? I have a tendency to get really excited about ideas and say yes. And so I've had to institute a very strict time buffer before I say yes to things. If you're like me, you should have one. And then the final thing on this slide that I want to highlight is remember you don't have to get an A in everything. And this, I think, is really important advice that I got at the beginning of my career where I'm currently teaching. Because if we've made it to this stage of graduate school, right, if we're doing our comprehensive exams, or we're dissertating, or we're at the beginning of jobs, we have been getting A's all along. We're A students. The students we teach, we get so frustrated with them. And I think sometimes because they're not doing their work or something, and they're not on time. And a lot of that has to do with imagining every student is like we were as students. But we're really unusual. And you can say yes to things, and it's if you understand that you don't have to get an A in it. You don't have to be the best. You don't have to go to every single meeting, right? You don't have to take over the thing. You don't have to become the core organizer of the graduate student conference. You can offer to do something that helps the graduate student conference but takes less time. Like, there are ways to say yes, but to moderate your yes, right? And not have to always get the A in everything. I'll also say, as an aside, teaching, really important to remember, you don't have to be the best teacher for every student. It's impossible to do, and it pulls our energy and time into one area and throws the rest of our work and life and political life out of balance, right? So you do not have to get an A in everything. All right, so let's talk through just a couple of examples of this. There are a bunch of different examples. I'm going to start with the second one on this list because I think it's one that in our current political crisis is one that a lot of us will be called upon to do. A lot of us are, because we're activists, academics, we are engaged in movements that and teaching things that are really relevant to the current political situation. And we might be asked to write a blog post or an article. We might compel ourselves to write a blog post and put it on Medium. We may be compelled to spend a lot of time on Twitter. Increasingly, I'm seeing academics do this, and I'm one of those. I have a personal blog. I write for the newspaper. A lot of my writing energy is spent on public media. So how do you know whether to say yes or no to this kind of thing? Again, I think it's about going back to your list of values and priorities, and it's really helpful to have people who know you well when you're making this kind of decision, because there's something really appealing about doing that kind of work. You get sort of immediate feedback. You can get a lot of likes. You can get a lot of shares, right? And these are things that can feel really good, and also help translate some of the positive work that we do in the classroom into the world of writing. Whereas an academic article or a chapter in a dissertation, the timeline of that is so long. The blog or a newspaper article, the timeline is really short. So it can be a really tempting way to go. So again, I wouldn't say yes or no to it, but I would like to encourage us all to think about our priorities, right? How much time do I have to spend writing? What is the most immediate priority? How much time can I actually give this piece of public writing? And will it lead towards the world that I want? Sometimes the answer is yes. A lot of times the answer is no, far more often than I think people say no, right? The second example I wanted to talk about was this idea, the first one on this list, that your advisor, department chair, boss asks you to join a committee or asks you to do something for the university. And this is particularly true if you're an adjunct or if you are in a visiting position or a TA, that you'll be asked to step up and do some kind of service work or additional teaching for the department. I want to say just a couple of things about this. Should you say no, or should you say yes? Again, it's going to depend on what your values and priorities are. But I want to caution you, as someone who's been in so many different temporary and contingent faculty gigs, the idea that joining that committee, teaching that class, helping that student group with a panel discussion, those kinds of service activities, say yes to them, but know that saying yes to them will not increase the chance that you will be brought on in a more secure academic position, right? So I might say yes to being on the classroom design committee because the world I want has classrooms with movable chairs and tables so that we can do group work better, so that we can better, in my activism class, we can better plan, do poster making for the activity, right? I might, in my mind, think this is a committee worth being on. But if I think being on that committee will make my chair think, or make the person who hired me think, oh, she should be a permanent member of the department, then I'm saying yes for the wrong reason, right? So just be clear about your motivations when you do say yes. And know that very little will change whether or not that adjunct job will turn into a full-time gig. That has very little to do with what we as workers do and a lot more to do with what the institution finds most affordable. So don't do that. The final one I'll just talk about before we bring this to a close and have a conversation is this idea of taking on an extra task for pay. And this one is really tough as grad students, I think especially, or as young faculty members who are going into the world with a lot of debt often from grad school, or used to that hustle that you have to get into if you want to financially survive graduate school. This, I think, again, say yes or no. Never imagine that doing the extra task will lead to a better job, but it can lead to different kinds of openings, right? So that's where, again, it's important to check with your values and priorities, right? So one of my priorities is to build a career for outside of academia when this one ends, right? So I will sometimes say yes to extra tasks at the newspaper, for example, as a way to build my portfolio for a different kind of job after grad school. So, after this, I'm no longer in grad school, sorry, for after this job. So again, it's sort of about figuring out what your priorities are, and having the people on your side to check you can be really helpful, because we will often find ourselves coming up with excuses to say yes because it sounds like it would be fun or interesting, or we don't want to work on our dissertation. Sometimes we should say yes, but we just need to be really clear in terms of that rubric of values and priorities we've already laid out about what is the best choice for us now. So I've listed a couple other examples that if you'd like to talk about in the discussion, we can. And these are more about politics. I would encourage us to remember that in our political activism, we have to pace ourselves. This is a long game, as everybody who's been organizing will tell us, right? And as we already know if we've been doing this organizing, but just like work and life, keeping those things in balance is going to be really important so that we can keep building towards this world that we want. So I'll go ahead and close that way and turn it back over to Kathy.
Okay, so I'm going to try to put Kate's video back up there. Okay, cool. So are there questions for Kate about any of the things that she was talking about? I know Catherine in the chat room is wondering how to differentiate that doing nothing state that's productive and kind of rejuvenates you versus the one that signifies something else like depression.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard one. And I think it's one of the reasons why we need to be writing down how we feel. One thing I do is I track, I just write like a couple of notes at the end of the day about what happened that day, like my general mood. And it's like the most boring diary ever, but it gives me a sense of, is this an ongoing feeling of like I can't do anything that would signify something that I would need, that would signify something like depression, or if it's just actually needing a break. And I think no one has a really good and easy answer to that question. I don't think, for when it signifies depression. I think that in my experience, depression is that total lack of that kind of disinterest, the lack of interest in things, and something that continues on for a period of time. But I think that's a really hard question. Kathy, do you have any thoughts about that?
I'll put this up here if this helps, just so I'm not a disembodied voice. I'd agree. Sometimes it's hard to tell, and sometimes one can dovetail into the other, right? So sometimes it starts out productive and it can turn depressive, or it can start out depressive and turn, it isn't linear in all cases. But I think what you're talking about in terms of curiosity is a really good way to mark that. And curiosity is the affect that I most identify with, and for other people it might be something else. It might be anger. It might be that thing, like things that piss you off and make you want to do something. Whatever that feeling is for you that makes you interested in stuff. If you notice that that's not there, I think that's a good way, and that's not there over a period of time. versus I'm just really tired right now and just kind of want to veg and watch TV and not really think about complicated things. But I can almost feel my body getting more energy, getting that revitalization, even though I don't want to do anything work-wise right this second. But I know that I will tomorrow because I'm like recharging now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's, yeah, and it's part of how work-life balance is something that's easy to talk
Yeah.
about and hard to do, because balance is the state that you achieve, right? It's this like constant checking in. And sometimes I actually don't know if I'm eating, like sitting on the couch and eating this bag of Cheetos because I need a break on a Friday after a long week, or if it's the beginning of what for me are patterns of like TV binging and food binging that are signs that something else is wrong. So part of it is just, I think, about sort of constantly checking in with yourself and realizing that no one ever achieves balance, right? It's like gender. You don't ever achieve it. It's just, it's always this practice that you're trying to keep, trying to figure out that balance, I think.
Are there other questions, folks?
Are there other questions?
I think your point about why am I
think
echoing?
your point.
Okay.
I do not hear you.
Just me. Hopefully that won't record. This is really annoying to me. Sorry. I'm going to mute you because I wonder if it's coming through yours. Is that better? Oh, that is better. Okay. Your point about not getting an A in everything is a really smart point. And that was a big, and I think you're right that if you get to the point of graduate school, if you're currently a graduate student, or if you're currently a faculty member, or if you were one of those things at one point or another, you got A's. That's why you were there. And your point about that being actually quite unusual for students is a good one, and how that applies to other areas of life. So I personally have that difficulty of, when I join something, I want to do as much as possible for it. And this often winds up producing me running a lot of organizations or committees, or volunteering to chair that thing or organize that event or whatever, when I really just wanted to be a regular member. The idea of being just a regular member, like not in a leadership capacity, is difficult for me to remember to do. But it's also really important. Like the idea that you can join the scholarly association and just be a member, that is an action, and that is good. That is a line for your CV. That is something you can be proud of in terms of what you're doing in the world. You don't have to have a leadership role in everything. You don't have to plan everything for everyone else. And sometimes it means that committee is going to suck, but you still don't have to chair it. It can just suck and you can just be there.
I went to a community meeting on this weekend, and I told myself in advance of the community association meeting that I would not volunteer for anything, that I could volunteer for something later, but at this meeting, I could not volunteer for anything. And I said it out loud. I said it as an intention, and I went to the meeting, and people started talking about a plan that I didn't agree with and that I thought would just bring more cops to my neighborhood, and I was against. And I thought to myself, don't volunteer, right? And then I raised my hand and I said something. I made my viewpoint clear, but I didn't volunteer for anything. And then I left the meeting when I had met the amount of time I'd scheduled for the meeting. I thought, okay, I could volunteer to be on the safety committee, and I could try and change the politics of how we spend our our measly budget for this community association and spend it differently. But then I thought, well, what's the best use of my time? What are my values, right? What's the community I'm trying to build? And it's not the community of homeowners in my neighborhood. It's something else. And the other question I ask, especially when deciding what political work to do, is this a lever that I can actually push? And I learned this from working with Ruthie Gilmore, who is a wonderful activist and thinker. And she says, find the lever that you can push, where you can have an effect, and go push that one, right? So there's no way that I'm going to get this, all these people on this community association to go along with me on on this one issue and it's not a great use of my time. What other levers can I push, right? Well, I have access to resources at my university and I have some students who need some assistance with this project. I can do that, right? So figuring out what can help you build that world you want, or what kind of activism you can do, but you don't have to commit to do all the things. Yeah.
I'll also say,
so know in advance, setting an intention to not.
I'll also say that you can quit. You can quit stuff. You can just stop doing it. I mean, like, don't just like stop showing up, tell people you're going to stop showing up. That just general politeness. But yeah, if it's not working, even with the best of intentions, you had grand plans for what this committee or organization or project was going to be able to do. And for whatever reason, it just hasn't been able to do it. And you are probably unhappy. You're probably annoyed. Perhaps people or the very existence of that organization or project is getting on your nerves. If you find yourself never wanting to open that computer file, never wanting to email those people, dreading every meeting that is coming up, a lot of that stuff, you can just quit. You don't need a better reason other than I'm not being effective. This is not the most effective use of my time. I'm not pulling, this is not a lever that I can actually pull and it will have an effect in the world, which doesn't mean you think the project's bad. It doesn't mean you think the people are bad. It doesn't mean you think the committee is a bad idea and should not exist. It just means that that's not the space for you right now. Maybe you can rejoin it later if it somehow changes or you change in relationship to it. Or maybe you thank it for what it did for you in your life and what you did for it, and you leave. And you can continue to support the work of it if it's something you believe in. You can share information about their events on social media. You can encourage your students to go to their stuff. You can, whatever it might be. But you don't have to be part of it, and you can quit.
Yeah, and the greatest gift that you can give another person and another organization, other group, is to be honest about what you need. And if you need to not be in the group, then just tell the group. The group will be fine without you. It's a hard, sad lesson to learn, but everything goes on just fine if you're not there. So it's okay to say no, even after you said yes. That's a really good point.
Basic consent. Okay, we have a couple more minutes left. Are there any lingering questions for Kate about work-life balance, about how to decide between the various things that we have pulling us in multiple directions?
I would just want to, I just want to reemphasize this part where if you're writing a dissertation or you have a big project, doing something that's not related to the big project doesn't mean that you're distracting yourself or you're never going to finish. That I actually found that I made the most progress on my dissertation when I realized I could keep living my life during the dissertation, right? And when you get out of graduate school, for example, if you're dissertating right now and you get a job somewhere, you'll realize that you have a lot more tasks than, daily tasks on your plate than you did as a dissertator. And you'll find that you can do them very quickly. I remember being in graduate school and it would be a week's long task to email my advisor, and now I can, I've written a conference abstract and rehearsed this webinar and written a syllabus and put up a Blackboard site all today because you just get faster at these things. But when you're done with your dissertation, you still have your life. Right? So you don't have to put it all on hold. And I actually think it's bad for our work when we put it all on hold. Like when we try to do our politics without pleasure, right? It's a bad idea. You do things because they feel good. I think that's important too. I wish someone had told me in grad school that it was okay to ride a bicycle and
have a life,
do the, yeah. Taking time to cook a meal or go to the movies is not cheating on your dissertation.
I think that's a really good place to stop. So thank you so much, Kate, for hosting. Thanks to all of you for being here, and those of you who will watch this replay later on the internet. You can catch the replay, although I suppose if you're watching it now, you know where you can catch the replay, which is right here. But you can also go to our website at ideasonfire.net/webinars to learn about our upcoming webinars. And you can also watch the recordings of past webinars there as well. We've had 2 so far. This is our 3rd. And so you can check out the recordings on self-care. There's a webinar on self-care, and there's a webinar on mapping your spring semester. Our next webinar coming up, we have two coming up. One that's exclusive to our grad school Rockstar program and dissertation Rockstar bootcamp participants. So if you're on the fence about enrolling, I encourage you to enroll so you can come to our next webinar, Rockstar webinar, which is about early dissertation planning. And then our next free webinar that's open to the public, to anybody who wants to show up, is about crafting a kick-ass book proposal. And so that one is on February 27th. And if you sign up for this webinar, you'll get added to our email list so I can send you information about the upcoming one. I'll also send you a link to this video replay as well as the slide deck that, that Kate produced for us today. So thanks so much for being with us. And I hope to see you at future webinars.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.